Hey everyone, and welcome to my studio. I am Susan Smith of Stitched by Susan. Today's live and unscripted episode is all about working on a whole cloth baby quilt with a heavy emphasis on the loading and the marking and planning process. Chances are I won't get the whole thing finished quilting today, but I will at least show you a one repeat of all of the quilting so that you can get some really good ideas from that for your own whole cloth baby quilt. This, by the way, is the fastest way ever. No piecing involved. So let me just take a moment to let my son introduce me to the show.
Welcome to Live and Unscripted with Susan Smith, Quilting's first reality show.
While he was doing that, I had a chance to grab my coffee. That was our son, Will, who loves to do all different kinds of voices, and he does my introductions for me. Huge thanks to him for that, and thanks are also due to my husband, Dave, who I affectionately call Mr. Producer. He's behind the scenes. There he is, and my mess. Making all the things work, making all the cogs and the wheels keep turning. Appreciate that. And our good friend, Dan Unger, who also provides the music, the guitar music that we play while I'm quilting. So we so appreciate that too. Okay. Where shall we start? There's so many things to tell you, and a lot of them I'm going to save to talk about kind of as I'm quilting, but let me introduce today's quilt just a little bit. I've done a few of these on YouTube episodes, by the way, so if this appeals to you, go back and look at some of the others because I've done different styles of quilting on them. But the magic of them is it is simply yardage. So I find a super cute print, whether floral or dinosaurs or frogs, whatever it is, that's going to be the underside of the quilt. And then I pick a solid for the top. And so it's just yardage. There's absolutely no piecing involved. And then I do pretty quilting on that top solid one. And I can customize that quilting to be, to fit whatever the quilt fabric is or who it's for. So for example, I did one that was a farm animal print on the back, and on the front I did some quilting that I thought looked like tractor treads and things like that. Today's is a soft floral, so it's going to be much more feminine for a little girl. There's going to be some feathers and loopy designs in it, and that's all fun. But I thought I would focus today a little bit on the loading process too. Yesterday I made a post on social media about kind of my point of view on loading, that it's so fast to not have to center backing and quilt or square them up perfectly before you load. And I got a flurry of questions about that process. So rather than rush through it this morning, I'll spend a little bit of time walking through that loading. So I think we'll start on that now. And then I'll just talk throughout the show about things that are coming up. There's a lot of them, by the way, and I'm going to mention one right now, which is our upcoming cruise in January. So myself, Beth Ann Nemish, and Sam Alberts will all three of us be teaching on this cruise. Dave and I are hosting. Dave has put the link up for you, and I'm sure he's got it in the chat as well. What we learned this week is that the boat we're sailing on, we have a little block of rooms, but the rooms as a whole on the boat are very nearly sold out, so the prices have risen. So now you can get my cruise with all the quilting classes for almost exactly the same price as those people who are buying rooms with no quilting classes. So the deal is getting better and better. And there's only a few rooms left. What do we have left, Dave? 8 or 9 rooms left in our block of 75, I think we started with. So it's getting pretty exciting. There's going to be a great group of quilters. Because there are that many rooms, there are going to be quite a few quilters, lots of chances to interact. Lots of quilting classes with the three of us, and also something we're bringing on this cruise that I've not seen in any other quilting cruise, which is a business slant to the material. Now, Beth Ann, Sam, and I all are entrepreneurs. We all have quilting businesses. So the formal classes, the scheduled classes are all about quilting. But in between, we have very optional and more casual breakout sessions that are on business building. So those of you who are interested in that get that extra sort of bonus content. We're still giving you a full roster of classes, but this is a little add-on, this whole working with clients, intake forms, planning, record keeping, all those things. So that's the cruise, but I'm going to get started loading and then just keep talking to you about things as we go. Okay. We froze. We froze for a second on that one camera. So I'm going to go ahead and start while Mr. Producer gets that straightened up, because I can keep talking even while the cameras have frozen. You know me, I can talk. So I'm working at my Bernina Q24, and I kind of do want to show this portion. Okay, he's working for just a second. While he does that, let me just say this then. YouTube, as always, is free, except you have to pay by watching ads. But it is free. But the one opportunity we offer you if you want to support us is to go to buymeacoffee.com/stitched by Susan. And forgive us, we are having a little bit of camera issue at the moment, but we'll get going, I promise. Anyway, buymeacoffee.com/stitched by Susan. There you're able to make a donation for as little as $5, or if you wish, you can sign up for a regular monthly contribution. All of the dollars that come through that go toward advancing our equipment, our lighting, our cameras, etc. And we've done a lot of that over the years. If you ever question that, go back and watch some episodes from a couple, 3 years ago. They're a little bit cringy, but you know, you got to start somewhere, right? Okay, we got our overhead camera yet? Because I kind of want to show this part. It died. Okay, I'm going to keep on proceeding. So at my Bernina, I flip my leader under the dead bar and over the roller. Those of you who have Berninas will kind of know what I'm talking about. And this is crucial to my method of loading. So that's why I wanted to point that out. And then I grab my backing, which is right here. Look at this sweet little floral. Isn't that pretty? So that's going to be the back of our quilt. And just for point of reference, the way that I like to do it for baby quilts is I buy 1.5 yards of the backing and 1.25 yards of the solid that's on the top. So I have a little bit of leeway around it, and I've trimmed my top a bit narrower too, so that I've got some backing on all edges to work with. And I'm going to end up with a quilt that's about 40 inches by something like 48 or 50, which is a really lovely size for a baby quilt. Okay, one other prep that I did, because we're talking today about speedy loading, right, and not having to center. But what I did do is cut one perfectly straight edge on my backing, and that's the first edge I'm going to load closest to me on this front rail. So let's turn that around. I like to use the red snapper system, but you can also do this with pins. You can do it with the Sew Tight magnets. Any way will work, but you need a straight edge, a for sure straight edge to load on this front side. Many times when we load quilts, we have a selvage on this front side, and so then you know that it's straight because we will often load our backing crossways. But for today's purposes, I am loading it top to bottom because my quilting is oriented that way. So I just needed to make sure I have a straight edge. And now I will go ahead and snap it on. And you can see I'm not measuring anywhere. I'm just putting it on my rails. Making sure that front edge stays straight. And I'm just gauging it by the hems of the leader. That's all I'm measuring my straightness by. On it goes. And by the way, whenever I unload a quilt, at both ends of my leaders, I put my little side clamps onto this front leader just to hold it up tight. Like you noticed when I started pinching this on, my leader was not flopping down on me. That's why I've got it hung on both sides and pinched onto the edges. Okay, now I'm taking my backing. We're still working on that darned overhead camera. I feel like I should pause again and because I want you guys to be able to see this. I did say I was going to concentrate on the loading. Okay, what else could we talk about? I know what I'll talk about. Let me grab my coffee. Oh, we're live. Mr. Producer, you're something else. Okay, here we go. Let me move Stella the long arm out of the way so you can see this, because this is the most critical point of my speedy loading method. I take my entire quilt backing, toss it over the far rail. And the critical point is it must go straight over the rail. Mr. Producer's moving the camera, so it's joggling a little, so you get a good view of it. It must go straight over the rail. This is crucial. You've started with a straight edge. Now you want to roll this on, but you want it to be happening straight. If I pull this even 1/2 inch, you start getting these angled lines, which tell you it's not going to roll on straight. It's going to roll on twisted. You don't want that. So not centering doesn't mean you don't have to do anything to roll the backing on. You can't just willy-nilly slap it on the long arm. But one of the precautions you can take is really making sure that this backing is perfectly straight over that back rail. It's kind of tricky with the baby quilt because I've got this big heavy leader and this lightweight little backing. So let me just back this up a touch so we can really see that. Okay, so now I'm confident it's straight. And one more thing I'm going to do before I roll is, and I'm stepping over my black cat. He's laying right in my walkway, silly guy. I'm going to get my trusty water spray bottle and give this backing a spritz. Now, I've got my fabric here straight off the bolt as it was cut. So of course it has that center crease and it's got some fold lines in it. I've had it on my shelf for a while, but I don't iron my backings. I just give them a light spritz with plain water. And that just allows those creases to relax. And trust me, I have done this on hundreds of quilts and it works beautifully. A viewer once said to me, "Ain't nobody got time for ironing," and I was like, amen to that. That is so true. Okay, now that I know that it's straight, now that I'm relaxing those wrinkles, now I will just begin to roll it on. And I'm going to roll until I see the end of my backing approaching the end of my leader. I can see it from where I'm standing at the hand wheel. Then I will grab my snappers, come around to the other side of the quilting machine. This is such a tiny little backing, it's super easy. On a big one, sometimes you have to, smooth it out just a little bit, but it's usually pretty straightforward. And I keep a magnet on this side of the machine to act as my pin so it doesn't flop off when I least expect it. And then I apply my snappers, or if I'm using pins or magnets, I apply whatever my device is at this end. And just like that, we have a loaded backing. Now the purpose early on of flopping my leader over the roller was so that when I let it flop back, as I just did, it is aligned properly under that dead bar. And I just figured that out by trial and error on my Bernina machine. The other amendment that I personally make to the loading process is this top roller here is actually what's intended for the bottom edge of your backing, but I use the lower roller because I'm going to float my quilt top, which you'll see in a few moments, and I want to be able to apply magnets here to hold it firmly in place. I don't want a ton of layers here. I don't want a roll of fabric on this bar. That's just my personal preference. You can do what's working for you. Okay. Our backing is all loaded, and now our batting. Stepping over the cat again. I wish I could show you guys. He's just flat out on the floor. I'm using today 80/20 batting, and it is by Winline. 80/20 is 80%. I don't still have the magnet on the back roller. I definitely set it down on the table. Okay. Someone is saying that, but it must, sometimes the comments take a minute to come through. Back to the batting. It is 80/20 by Winline, so 80% cotton, 20% poly. It's kind of my go-to batting, medium loft, very economical, very easy to work with. And this is my little quilt. Now, look at all those lovely marking lines. Can you guys see that? We'll get up closer and we're going to talk a little bit about this marking and planning. How shall we approach it first? I think stay on the overhead, Dave. Bear with me a second. I left my plexiglass sheet sitting. Where did I sit it this morning? Dave, am I losing my mind here? Oh, here we go. Here we go. Hang on. I'll be right back on camera. I'll be right back. Okay. Get all my tools that I want to show you. Before I start one of these quilts, and this is true for all the whole cloth ones that I've done, the basic premise is I'm quilting border type designs from side to side. Sometimes I will literally just do straight lines and it will literally just be stripes. But today I wanted to dress it up a little bit, so I've changed it into chevrons. But still the quilting design is just going to be one stripe and then another stripe. Okay, makes sense? So my planning then involved deciding how big those chevrons are going to be, like how wide and also how tall, and which ones I'm going to repeat. So when I do a quilt that's just straight lines, I will often just wing it. I'll do a big design and then I'll do a little one and then I'll do a medium one and so forth, and there's no real rhyme or reason. To me, the chevrons feel more formal, so I've kind of planned out what I'm going to put in them. So I did that first on my plexiglass sheet for a couple of reasons. I want to kind of balance the designs I'm using, so larger ones and smaller ones, perhaps more dense ones and more loose ones, so that you get some contrast going on, and particularly the exact size that I want those stripes to be. I do need to pre-plan my lines on the chevron because I have to quilt the chevron lines in, right? So I need to know where those are going. So I first thought about, okay, how wide do I want my chevrons to be? Knowing that I just had my width of fabric, knowing that I wanted 1, 2, 3 mountains, that means I need 6 equal parts, okay? So the width of my quilt, each chevron then came to 6.5 inches, and I'm going to have I've got about 41.25 inches of width. So I wouldn't get hung up on those measurements. Just take whatever your fabric width is and divide it into 6 or however many chevrons you decide to do. And a side note, I have quilted this type of design on bigger quilts. In that case, I tend to make wider chevrons too, like keeping it to appropriate scale for the size of quilt you're doing. But this is a baby quilt, so they can stay fairly small. Okay, so my chevron width is just over 6 inches. My chevron depth from peak to valley, I put at 5. That's just personal preference. You sure could do shallower ones if you wanted to, but I do advise literally drawing out your quilting design first to get a feel for that. The first time I did it, I had much deeper peaks and valleys, and I didn't like the look of it at all. But I found that out on my plexiglass sheet before I started quilting it, which is the beauty of trying it out on these sheets. Okay, so that said, we kind of know where we're going with our design and generally what we want it to look like. Then I actually drew it out specifically and with my measurements in place. Then I took my trusty ruler and I actually took, let me show you guys because you might not believe me. Got all my little tools here. I took an actual Sharpie, okay, and where every one of my lines are, I marked it on this ruler. There's so much to say, I don't hardly know what order to put it in. Shall we have a front end angle camera, Dave, for a minute? Because I think a closer view might be better of this one. When I'm quilting these border type designs, I like to put a double line between them to provide some separation. If you were to put a feather right next to bubbles and only have one solid line between, it just does not look nearly as good. That one line kind of gets lost. Your designs almost touch each other. So I like to put 1/4 inch spacing or about that between every design. So as you can imagine now, when I'm doing my 5-inch feather and then I'm doing my inch wide bubbles and then I'm doing my 1.25 inch wide wavy line and then I'm doing another set of loops that are 4 inches, and between every one there's a 1/4 inch line. That's a lot of lines. It's a ton of places to go wrong, even though I have my roadmap drawn on my plexi sheet. That's why I go ahead and take my plexiglass rule, not plexi, but it's just a quilting ruler that has lots of markings on it, okay? And I literally transfer all my marking lines with a Sharpie along this edge of the ruler. And I also mark what is my top edge and what is my bottom edge. So you're going to see me rinse and repeat, marking these dots, transferring these dots to the quilt over and over and over. They've got to be on every chevron line. It's quite a bit of marking, but it's only dots. But this just keeps me from making mistakes. Like, just ask me how I know. You would think you could just say, well, it's 4 inches and then 1/4 and then 1.5 and then 1/4 and then, but oh my word, you can go wrong. So just use the Sharpie, trust me on that. And then I just have these little medical type alcohol swabs. When your quilt is all finished, you can just clean the whole ruler. Beautiful. Just keep your Sharpie away from your quilt. That's the only really important thing. And actually, my dry erase marker that I wrote on my plexiglass sheet with, we'll keep that away from the quilt too. Okay, that said, let's have a big look again at the quilt, Dave, if we could. Do the quilt lines even show the marking lines? They don't. Okay, maybe let's have the head on camera then. You can see my markings now, right? So what I've done, it is really hard to know what to say first. I've got one set of repeating lines drawn on here, and I drew them so that you could see them. As I get to quilting, I'm actually only going to mark the dots, and I'm just going to do those connectors with a ruler, saving a ton of time. Okay, back on my face, please. One more thing that I did that I should have mentioned sooner, but I'm going to tell you now. This is such a useful tip. On my quilt top as a whole, okay, I've determined where my chevrons are going to be, how widely apart they're spaced. I laid my quilt top on one layer of batting on top of my cutting mat, and all those vertical lines that mark my chevron turning points, I marked with a tracing wheel. You could also use a Hera marker or even a plastic knife from your kitchen that's not serrated. You know, you can get those plastic knives that you cut in the nonstick pans. And I literally just traced on those vertical lines top to bottom of my little quilt top. That tiny little crease is all really the marking you need to know where to turn in your chevrons. Does that make sense? So this little tool is super, super helpful. And I put one layer of batting under it because that little bit of softness helps it to get a nice little crease. Those creases, unlike an air erase marker, do not ever disappear until you wash the quilt or get it wet in some way. So they'll last. You may not see them on camera because they're very subtle, but trust me, those lines are visible to me and they're all the way through the quilt already. So now I can just lay down my ruler, mark my dots, and proceed. Two kinds of marking pencils that I use typically in my quilting. One is the purple air erase and one is the blue water erase. For this project, I choose to use the water erase because it will last until I specifically take it out. With the air erase, it's apt to disappear, and I'm not going to get this done in an hour or even 2. It might take me 3. And I might take a lunch break. Do you know what I mean? And I don't want my dots, all that careful marking, to disappear. So I choose to do this type of quilt with the blue marker that stays. One last tool that you're going to love. This is by Soline, and it's an eraser for these marking pens. It works on the blue or the purple, and it's got like a kind of like a felt tip pen type of point and a little canister of water. So you can you kind of squeeze it. It's got a little bubble, and you can easily erase either the dots or if you're tracing out the actual lines, but you can do fine erasing as opposed to spritzing, and then everything's gone, right? So this is a super tool as well when you're doing this kind of marking. Okay, you guys, let's take a minute for some questions and for me to get some coffee because I've been doing a heck of a lot of talking, and then we'll get started quilting. Sorry, we're taking some questions. Mr. Producer didn't hear me, bless his heart. He's so busy over there doing stuff. Okay, Nancy. Hang on 2 shakes. I'll take a sip. Nancy, I accidentally grabbed the dry erase marker instead of the water soluble, made 2 dots before I realized. It's so easy, Nancy, for that to happen. So I'm pretty careful to do my ruler marking and so forth, usually at my cutting station, and even my practice on my plexi sheet at my cutting station, and I don't bring those markers generally to my quilting area just to avoid that because it's so easy. Okay, next. Sarah, apparently the guy setting up my long arm is the guy bringing long arms on your cruise. Oh, it must be Doug. Awesome. He's great. He's so great. Good. I know he'll give you lots of helpful hints and just be super. Nancy, I used a high loft batting for the first time and struggled with pleats. Any helpful tips? That is a difficulty, Nancy, and one of the reasons I don't love high loft battings. They just add a level of complexity. So my only tip is you have to take more precautions against things stretching or pushing ahead of your hopper foot. You might have to put in more basting. You might have to drop pins in now and again to stabilize things. It just requires more attention to detail. Yeah, but we don't have that today. So, Sue, I am going to stitch a rainbow in one corner with fact stitching. Not sure. Fancy stitching. We'll need stabilizer. Do I use a wash away stabilizer and leave it in, or use tear away and remove before quilting? Sue, I don't know that I have an answer to that. I have so seldom used stabilizers. That's just not part of my typical quilting repertoire. So I'm sorry I don't have a good answer for you. Some people in the chat might have that. And by the way, Sue brought that to my attention. If you'll put a QQ in front of your questions while we're live, that really helps us to go back and search for them and pull them out from among the general chatter so that we can find the questions and answer them. Linda, I've just started using the Flexion felt tip markers, heat erase. I'd heard that cold will bring them back. The red marker did come back when I put my test piece in the freezer. Linda, those are markers I've not used a lot, but I would not use them for marking such as this because I've heard lots of people tell those horror stories, and I believe them. They're not intended to be used for the purpose of marking and then erasing necessarily. Like you could mark seam allowances with them if you're sewing or things like that, but to mark quilting like on an art quilt or somewhere where it will be visible and expect that it will go away, that's not a promise Flexion makes, and it doesn't happen. It's not reliable. So you're absolutely right about that. Use the purple or the blue when in doubt, or chalk. Mike or Sharon, what type of magnets do you use to hold the quilt? I'll get to that in just a moment. Thanks for reminding me. I will show those in just a jiffy. Nancy, oh yeah, we saw this one already. Cindy, never thought about using a Sharpie on my ruler. I've used small pieces of blue painter's tape. Sharpie would be much easier. Thank you for the tip. Yes. And I got that tip from another quilter too, and it's been super. You know, once it's dry, and that just takes a second, it's not going to transfer onto your fabric. And you can just keep it for the duration of your quilt and then clean it off afterwards, and it's a beautiful thing. All right. Let's get started quilting. I realized that I had my bobbin filling and I don't actually have it loaded. So while I do that, I'll talk to you about my thread choices. I am using Isacord thread today, 100% poly thread in a 40 weight, and I'm using a pale shell pink. And I will give you guys the number in just a jiffy. Let's see. The pale shell pink, I mean, it's not going to really matter, 2171, but you know, you guys won't have the same color quilt top as I do. But I know you often ask the number, so there it is. You have the pale shell pink. And sometimes I do all these things before we get on air, but today I thought I would show you. Before I start quilting, I always take the time to put a drop of oil in my quilting machine, and it's something that I do not necessarily with every bobbin, but at least with every second one. Those of you who are faithful viewers and notice that I'm threading my needle the old-fashioned way, I've dislodged the wire in my needle threader. So it is actually not working at the moment. But let's put a drop of oil in. This, by the way, is the sum total of my maintenance, like while I'm quilting in a given day, is to put a drop of oil in the bobbin casing and to occasionally run my brush through and grab lint. I was quilting till late last night, so this is my morning setup. Get that oil in there. I spun it back and forth a few times, load my bobbin, and we're in business. I'm going to baste my quilt first, and then I'll show you guys the magnets that I typically put on the front to hold everything in place. Just want to be sure that I'm centered from side to side, and I'm going to move right just a little bit. I don't have a ton of extra fabric on the left and right sides to clamp to, so I want to use it as judiciously as I can and get enough on both sides. It is going to be a little tricky because I'm using rulers, and when I use rulers, I prefer to have more excess on the sides, but I want to get the biggest possible quilt out of this, so I've chosen to make do. Let's go ahead and put our engage our belts so I have a nice square. No, I can't do that. Oh, funny story, you guys. I'm so spoiled. On my Q24, I have this little option when the Qmatic computerized system is turned on, I can activate a glide feature, and then even when my belts are engaged, I can move my machine. It just holds it in a nice straight line. But when I don't have the Qmatic turned on, I can't move it. It's totally stiff, and that's the case today. So we're by guess and by goshing this, which is quite easy to do on such a small quilt. I'm just using either my red snappers because they're very visible, or even the edge of my leader as a visual guideline. I've got my solid piece of fabric nice and square and smooth and straight on here, so I'm just freehanding it across the top. I'm using a 1/4 inch basting stitch. It doesn't really matter what kind of stitch you use, as this is all going to be hidden in the binding. So I've basted up the left side, across the top, and down the right. And those of you who like to baste center out, that's absolutely acceptable. This is just my personal shortcut. I don't seem to have any trouble keeping the quilt square and straight, so that's one of the shortcuts I take. Now, here come the magnets. I will show one in the side camera. These are bar magnets. I just got them at the hardware store. They're about 1 inch wide. They're heavy. They're strong. And I use them on my front rail. So this again is part of my loading system. Remember, I loaded my backing it passes over that front rail, but actually rolls onto the lower rail, so that I only ever have my backing, my batting, and my quilt top here. My magnets don't have any trouble sticking through those layers. I was working on a super thick quilt yesterday, and I still didn't have any trouble. So the end result is I now have all 4 sides of my quilting surface secured. It can't pull out of place. This cannot pull up in the center as I'm quilting. That's what the magnets do. There are other ways you can do that. There are C-clamps. If you don't have either of those, you literally could run a line of pins along the front, but in some way you want to secure this so that it doesn't pull up while you're quilting. All right, we're on to the ruler work, I think. Let me grab some rulers. Stepping over the cat again. What rulers shall we use today? I might have to make Mr. Producer run. Nope, we'll go with this one. Funny story, you guys. I'm full of stories today. So I was telling you about my travels in our early introduction. I'm going to get my coffee while I talk to you. From the very end of August right through a couple weeks of September, I've been traveling, and I was in Texas teaching, and it was a class on free motion and ruler work, so I took all of my rulers with me so that students could play with them. And since I'm home, which has only been a couple days, I've been doing 100 other things, and I realize I haven't fully unpacked all my stuff, and I never thought of that this morning. My favorite rulers are still packed in there. However, this is an old standby favorite, which some of you may be familiar with. A1 used to make this ruler. It's gone in and out of production. I'm not sure if it's available now or not, but it was designed by Jamie Wallen. And once I learned that, I went to Jamie Wallen's website, which is Quilter's Apothecary, and his rulers are the ones I typically use now. They're like this in that they have this lovely handle, which I love. You'll see as I use it today, it just enables me to hang on to that ruler in a million different ways. And there's a link for Jamie's rulers in the notes below this show, because they are so good. And he does offer, by the way, he's got a collection of straight rulers in different sizes. And there's the SBS, the Stitched by Susan collection. And there's a coupon in the show notes for you to get a discount off of those, 10% discount off of those. Okay, here are a couple thoughts I'm having. I talked about the fact that I don't have much excess on the sides of my quilt to put clamps on. I usually do put side clamps on just to secure it so it can't pull at all. But I'm going to try, because this quilt is so small and there's very little wiggle happening, I'm going to try doing it without the clamps and see how it goes. If I'm finding any tendency toward pleats or toward pulling awkwardly, then I'll have to put them on and live with it. But I'm going to try, for the moment, to quilt without them. So on my Bernina Q24, We have several stitch regulation choices. There's the BSR1 and the BSR2. The BSR1, on some other machine brands, it's called coasting. So when your machine is engaged, the needle will still gently go and then it will zoom along as you're stitching, but then even when you stop, it will still keep bobbing. I don't want that when I'm doing ruler work. So if you can turn your coasting function off, do that. On the Bernina, it's just a matter of choosing BSR2. So when I'm not moving my machine, it's not stitching. That's what I want for today. So we're going to start. No, we're not. I bet you guys are saying this in the comment. I bet you are, because I know you guys. I don't have my ruler plate on yet. This is so critical. Let me grab it. For ruler work, it is essential that you have some kind of extender plate for the long arm. So my typical long arm nose is just this very little square. It's about 3 inches by 5 on my machine. And your ruler, of course, will wobble on that, and you don't want that to happen. So an extender plate, whatever that looks like for your brand of machine, is a must for ruler work. Now we're going to start quilting. And you notice I'm not starting at the very, very corner of my quilt. I'm going to start with the first full chevron, and then I'm going to go back and finish those top little corners later on. That's just a matter of personal preference. This ruler is barely long enough to do these lines from start to finish. So for these first few lines, I drew them in entirely. As I work my way down the quilt, you're going to see that I tend to just drop in the dots for my markings and quilt from dot to dot. It's much faster, but certainly if it offers you more security, or if you're new to ruler work, you might want to trace them all the way in. You might even want to do that at the beginning part of the quilt, and then gradually as your confidence grows, you might not need to use them all. And this is a pretty forgiving quilting design. I'm not going to be absolutely painstaking about, well, if I'm off the line by a thread or two, I'm just not going to worry about it, is what I'm saying. So again, I don't think you'll be able to see it on camera, but I'm able to see these very subtle crease lines that I initially put into place. That lets me know exactly when to turn my corners. And also, if you're working at a Bernina or any brand that's got removable handlebars, if I didn't have a camera attached to my handlebar, I would be swinging it up out of the way. It would make ruler work much, much easier. But for you guys, I'll keep it in. I'm thinking here. I actually am on the wrong side of that line, you guys. Okay, you're going to get a free lesson here on unstitching. Sometimes I do just get to talking and not pay enough attention to where I'm going. I should have looked at the left-hand side of the quilt where I've got all the marking in place. I'll try and keep this on camera so you can see it. Unpicking is a skill, surprisingly, that long armers do need. And here's how it goes. I'll give you guys a couple of my favorite tips. One of them is I let the long top thread get longer and longer so that I can start wrapping it around my fingers, and I pull it quite hard. I'm trying to get to an angle where you can see it. And I'm pulling it about 45 degrees away from my quilt. If I pull it back this way, it's hard to grab those stitches with my seam ripper. If I'm pulling it too flat, it's also difficult. But if I pull it up just a little, it literally pulls up that bobbin thread, and I can just run my seam ripper across it and catch it. And that exact angle really comes with experience, but you'll see that I move my hand whenever I turn a corner. And then when that bobbin thread gets a little bit longer, I yank it and break it, and then just keep on going. Okay, while I'm undoing, because this is sort of like watching paint dry, I want to tell you about something else that is upcoming. This is a little bit date sensitive, so we're airing this live on September 20. Coming up at the end of this month and going over into October, I am hosting a boot camp called Stitch Confident. And it spans 13 days in total. And within that period of time, I'm delivering 3 kind of foundational trainings on tension and stitch formation. So it's machine tension and more. Everything that I can think of that makes pretty stitches and everything I can think of that causes ugly stitches, and how you avoid that, how you work with that, how you problem solve and diagnose. So this boot camp is, the 3 pillar trainings that I mentioned, and then several shorter sessions that are kind of adjacent topics, like fibers that you're working with, fibers in your thread, fibers in your batting, fibers in your fabric, and how that affects your stitches. So things that affect stitching but not directly tension control. And all of this is being aired on YouTube, so anybody can sign up for it that's able to watch episodes on YouTube. But there will also be a Facebook group where there will be all kinds of links, there will be a lot more interaction, and there will be lots of opportunities for you to even post photos of your projects and say, here's what's happening, help, that kind of thing. So I wanted to mention that. Dave, I wonder if you would mind looking in the giant suitcase that came home from Stitch House for my big packet of rulers. And it looks like this, because I really want my longer ruler. Looks like this, and it's full of rulers. Hang on, you guys. I'm off camera. Bless your hearts. You're so patient with me. I found it. It is unpacked. It is in my sewing room. It is just not back in its drawer. I found my ruler. Okay, look at this. Here's my big Jamie Wallen ruler. I love his rulers, as I mentioned earlier, because of the handles. This one is a 14-inch, which typically is really, really long. Like, you can't quilt the whole length of it without repositioning your hand. But it comes in handy in the case of a quilt like this one, where my shorter ruler is not quite long enough to go from point to point. So then I still have to shift my hand. So this ruler will be just the ticket. That's the one I wanted. I'm back in business. I want to be able to reach from dot to dot. And I see that not all my markings are super clear on here, so I'm going to take a minute. If you guys have any questions, this is a great time to jot them in. I'm going to take in a minute and drop in some of these markings again. I was messing around with erasing things, and so the fabric must have been a tiny bit damp, and they've gotten really, really faint. Okay. Remember I mentioned I mark on my ruler what is the top part, so I never get my ruler upside down, because actually my repeats for this entire pattern are the full length of this ruler. And because I marked in the shape of that first chevron, now I can just start from the top point and then start from the valley. And then on the next line, start from the top point, and on the next line, start from the valley. And they literally go all the way to the bottom of this 18-inch ruler. And on these lower ones, I can't even fit them all in. I'll have to finish them when I advance my quilt a little bit. Okay, so now we're going to begin quilting dot to dot. We'll move our marking ruler away. I think they're all in. Yep. So like I said, this very first section here, I marked in all the chevrons, all the lines that I'll be quilting so that you can see them. But in the next sections moving over on the quilt, I've only marked the dots. And I need to have my plexiglass sheet really handy because it is literally my road map. Excuse me, cat. Make sure that it's right side up. To some extent, I'm going to quilt in the fills between these lines as I go. And some of the things I'll come back and do later. That is strictly a matter of personal preference. And by the way, you notice that my quilt is not shifting. Even though I don't have side clamps on, it seems to be holding in place just fine. Part of that is because I am using a ruler plate, so I'm kind of holding everything in place with my ruler. So that's good to know. That's a decision I'm just making on the fly. So here I am now quilting dot to dot. If you've never tried ruler work before, I really encourage you to do it. On a quilt like this, it's almost magical because it, well, in many ways, on any quilt, because it is so perfect, because you're following a ruler, it just gives you this framework. And then if you're quilting free motion things in between, they always look good because you're working within this lovely framework of very regular, fairly perfect lines. We won't say totally perfect. Nothing is that. For those who may be tuning in, let me give you a quick rundown again of the materials and products that I'm using. I have a floral fabric on the backing, and I started with 1.5 yards of that, and then I have 1.25 yards of solid fabric on the top. So the pretty quilting will show up on the solid side. It's kind of a reversible quilt. So on the floral side, you won't see the quilting as much, but it is a super pretty feminine floral. Excuse me. I'm using Isocord 40 weight 100% polyester thread for my stitching, and I have the same thread top and bottom, this pale pink. I'm using Jamie Wallen or Quilter's Apothecary rulers, or ruler right now. Excuse me. Sorry to cough into the microphone. I need to get a sip of coffee. I've been doing a lot of talking this morning. I don't always talk so steadily when I'm quilting with you guys, but there was so much explanation to do today. I really want you to be able to try one of these quilts too and have success with it. They are so fun and rewarding. You get to decide, of course, how detailed the quilt is, but it's entirely possible in a half day to turn out a very lovely baby quilt. Sometimes when I'm purchasing my fabric, I purchase enough of the solid to bind it with as well, and sometimes I do a different binding, so be thinking that through when you are purchasing your fabric so that you're sure to have enough. I'm not terribly particular about whether or not my binding is on the cross grain or the straight of grain, like the lengthwise or the crosswise on my fabric. So sometimes I will literally use my trimmings off the sides of the quilt and any that's left over at the end, and sometimes that works too. But just think that through when you're purchasing your fabric so you don't get into a position where you can't find it again to match. Okay, Mr. Producer is going to tighten the camera, so we'll give him a second to do that. If you guys are enjoying this live and unscripted episode, I love a thumbs up, even a share with your friends. Live and unscripted on my channel always is the format of I'm doing something in real time. It's often a client quilt. It's sometimes a quilt that has challenges or issues, but in every case, I quilt in real time and I talk about it as I'm working. And sometimes I actually problem solve on air, and sometimes you all chime in and help me solve those problems. So it's real world quilting. Certainly one of the challenges that we have faced with this show is the bouncing camera, which you're seeing a little bit today. And it's interesting how when I'm quilting freehand, I usually have both hands on the handlebars, and just that having my left hand on that handlebar does hold it more still. But of course, when I'm ruler quilting, I have one hand on the ruler and no hand on the handlebar, so you are getting that little bit of bounce. So I apologize for that. This is the last line I'm going to quilt, and then we're going to go back and fill in between. And like I said, sometimes I will do those betweens just as I'm working. It absolutely doesn't matter. That is strictly a matter of personal preference. I'm just worried about being talking and then putting the wrong thing in the right place. So I'm just going to do that all at once. And hopefully Mr. Producer has some lovely music on for you, because then it's just going to be a matter of rinsing and repeating. All the way down this little quilt. Okay, what shall we do first? The fills between or the feather? If we've got the big camera on, Dave, I'm actually going to do a little bit more marking at the top, and I'm going to get one more line done up there. Make sure I get the right end up. This one is right here. This one is here. Yeah, this is going to be tricky. I might have to transfer this to a shorter ruler. You're seeing my difficulty. I can't push my ruler up there. I need this end of the ruler to be right here, and I wish I could just fold it in half, but I can't. So I'm going to have to jettison that plan and come back to that later. What I'll probably do is take some of these markings and transfer them onto a shorter ruler so that I can lay in these triangles at the top and get those markings in place. Or I will very carefully, while I'm not talking, just note, you know, 1/4 inch, inch, inch and a quarter, and jot them in. The same way that I've got them way over here in this corner, they need to be in all these triangles. But as I mentioned very early on, I can also just do these full chevrons all the way down, and I can roll my quilt back and come in and fill this last little bit at the end as well. So let's quilt in some of these details. I'm going to once again refer to my roadmap, which is my plexiglass sheet, to know what goes in which line, which space. So we're going to start down in this one, quilting a simple wavy line. This is honestly one of my favorites because I like having a contrast of density of quilting, and this is clearly a very simple, a very non-dense one, and so it provides that lovely contrast. And I just bumped up against the bottom of my rail. How interesting, I didn't on the other side. We've got a bit awkward of a line over there. And now I'm thinking to myself, because you'll notice that I left one open, I'm thinking to myself, which things can I quilt easily from right to left, or are there some that I prefer quilting left to right? Well, I happen to know that that one that's in the middle, at least the first time, I want to quilt it from left to right until I get myself sort of used to the flow of it. So that's why I chose to come and do this wavy line back. And I'm just freehanding these little waves. I just always make sure that my curve, even if I have to stretch it like I did there, follows the point of the chevron. And it seems to all work out in the end. Okay, in this one, I'm going to do bubbles, and every second bubble is going to get filled with a little spiral. I love the look of this. When this is released off the long arm, you just get this very definite button effect from the ones that are filled and the ones that are wide open. And I'm going to make some notes after I quilt today, because I see right away I could easily have made these quite a bit bigger. When I was thinking it through, I thought, wow, 1¼ inch circles, I don't know if I can do them a lot bigger than that and still keep them round. But I see that I absolutely could have. As you can imagine, the smaller these stripes are, the longer it takes to get down the quilt. So that's why having them bigger would have been desirable. And that's one of the things that you can't tell by drawing on a plexiglass sheet. There's lots of things it will tell you, but what it actually feels like when you're quilting it won't tell you that. And it's kind of funny, I seem to give away these baby quilts as fast as I make them, and so I never have one here that I can refer back to, which would certainly be the other option. I do not pre-mark these, and so I can't always determine where they're going to end up in a chevron point. All I'm going to try to do is make them symmetrical, so that I've got either a circle right in the point, or I have two circles symmetrically arranged around the point. So if you were watching the earlier ones, I've done both ways already. We'll see how this next one ends up. It's going to be two symmetrical ones. No, I'm going to get one right in the point. And I've made this one just a little smaller to accommodate that. I'm just looking ahead a little bit. So there's one right in the point. And on we go. For those of you who are not Bernina users, those bright red lights that you see are actually the little cameras that are in my throat plate. A lot of stitch regulators are based on encoders on the rails or wheels of the machine. But in the Bernina, they are actually little cameras embedded into the throat plate. And so when I have my stitch regulator on, you see these lovely little red eyes shining. But they are very sensitive. They are reading my movement over the fabric and adjusting my speed accordingly. We're done that. Now, my next one is going to be a feather in the largest section. And I've vacillated over this over my different quilts. Sometimes I will do one feather left to right and then another feather right to left. I haven't decided yet what I'm going to do today. Maybe you all want to vote on that. Should I alternate the feathers or should I do them all flowing in the same direction? The one prep that I like to do is to mark the spine of my feather. I'm not going to actually quilt it. I prefer to quilt spineless feathers. I don't care for the look of the thread buildup that you get when you quilt over and over that center spine. So you'll see they're going to be quite casual feathers, but I do need a guideline. So I'm just taking my air erase pen, because it doesn't need to be here for very long, and drawing it in. And I do want my curves, as you see, and I'm wondering if that's too many. I don't think so. I want my curves to follow the points of my chevron too, right? So there's always a top and a bottom one. Like this. Very simple. Very, very simple. And now I'm going to quilt what I call a whimsical feather. It's a little of this and a little of that, basically. And then after that feather, I think we'll stop so I can get another drink. My throat is so scratchy. And you guys can ask any questions that you have, and we'll go from there. So as you can see, I am not quilting the actual spine. I'm just using that purple line as a guideline. And I merge into the spine so that when you look at the whole feather when it's done, you'll kind of see a spine. but I'm not actually ever quilting the whole thing. I feel like my machine needs a little more oil. I'm really getting a rattle in the bobbin. I'm not sure if you guys can hear that or not. That's the recognized Bernina signal for either your bobbin is almost empty or you need to fill it. Or you need to oil, sorry. One or the other of those things. While I quilt this, let me talk again about the upcoming boot camp. I call it Stitch Confident. It's ostensibly about tension, but really it's about stitch formation, because a lot of factors play into that, not only tension. But certainly it will be a deep dive into tension as well. This is a sort of concentrated series of days. There are 3 trainings and a number of other live supporting sessions on topics that are related. They're all going to be aired on YouTube, so that's all the access you have to get the trainings. There will also be a Facebook group for those who want to join that, with kind of some extracurricular things and some extra chance to interact with students and also with me. But that is not an essential. It's just an easy place for us to put a lot of the links and for us to get in there and answer your questions, and for you to even be able to share photographs. So as part of these trainings, I'll be presenting some teaching, and then I will also be giving suggestions for things that you can be practicing during this boot camp to really bolster your understanding of how your machine forms stitches and how you can problem solve and troubleshoot. It is going to be, I believe, for the most part demonstrated at a long arm, and that's kind of the focus of it, although there will be lots of material that is also applicable to a domestic machine. A lot of the principles still apply. So if you're interested in that boot camp, I'm pretty sure Mr. Producer is putting a link in the chat. I know that he is, because he's so good at that. There is a fee for this boot camp. It is $37 to enroll. And you know how a lot of workshops will say, $197 value. I'm not going to say that, but I will promise you that there will be a lot of value. I will pack it with valuable content for you. Included for every student is going to be a copy of my ebook, which I kind of tongue-in-cheek have entitled Tension Headaches, anyone? So everyone will have a copy of that to take with them, and it is basically a collection of all the tips that I have ever heard of or found to be useful that have to do with problem solving regarding tension at your quilting machine. So it's kind of a reference material for you to take with you in the future. Try this, try that, check that box, try the next thing. I'm kind of excited about this. It's the first time that I've offered a boot camp in this format. And I'm a little excited about it because I feel like there's value in this continuity of really focusing on a particular topic for some days, doing some practice that applies to it, like just really coming to grips with understanding your machine, understanding tension, understanding the things that you can change and control, the places that you can troubleshoot, all of that. I kind of deliberated over the topic because I thought, gosh, it's not a very glamorous one, and it isn't, but it is absolutely a critical one. You know, if you've ever had tension issues, and I bet you have, I think every quilter has at some point, you've had days when you're just absolutely struggling and you're frustrated and can't figure it out, it absolutely stops you in your tracks. There's just nothing you can do or quilt or sew until you figure it out. So it is so, so critical. So even with this freehand stitching, I'm finding that my quilt is not shifting very much at all. So I'm happy with it without those side clamps on. It seems to be working just fine. And just because I want to see my feathers without the lovely purple line through the middle, I'm going to grab my spritz bottle and give just the feather a spray. I don't want my upper lines to disappear just yet. And while we talk, that purple line will disappear and all we'll see is wetness. But we'll be able to see the feather. I should add here too, if I had my druthers, and I learned this I think from Beth Ann Nemish, that when you're quilting a matching thread to a fabric, you can add, let's word it differently. If you use a thread that's a shade or two darker than the fabric, it adds depth and richness. It still matches, but it adds depth and richness. I knew this before I started this quilt, but I didn't want to wait to take the time to order in more thread. My thread is actually a touch lighter than the fabric. And I find I don't love that look. So, you know, the person who's receiving it is not a quilter. They're going to still love it, so I'm fine with it. But just a side tip that I'm giving you. If it just looks a little bit more reflective when it's lighter, and when it's a bit darker, it's just got this richer, deeper value to it that I really love. So, you know, live and learn. These are the things you don't know till you see it quilted out. Okay, have we got any questions or comments or thoughts? Mr. Producer says, oh yes, there's lots. Betsy, do you use a toa gauge from time to time to check the tension? I do, Betsy, and I also, years ago, I did the whole drop, you know, in your hand, the drop test, and I've kind of fallen back into doing that a bit just because it's quicker and it's handy, and I know what that should feel like. So it's two ways to test your thread tension, and I use both of them. And some days, as you saw me today, I don't use anything. I use my knowledge of what that thread should look like and how it's feeling, and even how it's feeling when I pull it out of the bobbin. All of that kind of comes together after a point in your experience. It works for me. Selena, my dealer loaded the leaders with the back on the top rail and the top on the lower rail. You load your backing on the lower rail you just mentioned. Did I hear you correctly? I do load my backing on the lower rail in the front and on the top rail at the back. Yes. I don't have a manual in front of me. I don't think I turned my leaders at all. I think all I did was use the one on the lower rail, and it might even be the top leader. I just use it for my backing, if that all makes sense. And I don't use the markings on the leaders at all. Debbie, do you know the dates of the boot camp? Is it 3 conservative days? Oh, consecutive, I bet is what you mean. It's not, Debbie. The Facebook group is opening on the 28th of September, and then the final day is the 9th of October. I think that's right. And the trainings are sprinkled throughout there. They are not in 3 consecutive days, so that you have a little bit of time to go and do some things at your machine and then to check back in if you have any questions. So they're kind of sprinkled throughout that. I think I told you 13 days earlier, but that doesn't add up to 13. That adds up to 11, I believe. But I do know the 28th to the 9th. I do know that. So the 29th of September is like a welcome party, and then the 30th of September is the first actual training. And there are replays if you can't make it live. Pamela's asking, how do you keep your ruler from slipping around? Pamela, that is strictly a matter of experience. I remember the very first quilt I did that had ruler work was a similar design to this. It was on a pieced quilt, but I was just quilting these giant chevrons, and it was on like a twin-sized quilt, so bed-sized. And I feel like it took me that whole quilt till I got to where I found this balance between pushing so hard that I could hardly move my machine, or not pushing hard enough and then my ruler would move around. You just get used to the feel of it. So just quilt some more with rulers. Quilt more. You'll get the feel of it. I do love a ruler with a handle. I do think that is easier to control than the flat ones that you just push on. Might be personal preference, but there you go. I love that I have time between questions for sips. Linda, I have a sit-down Q20. I find it hard to hold the ruler tight while at the same time moving the quilt. Am I doing something wrong Or is this just how it goes with a sit down? It is a different feel for sure, Linda. Be absolutely sure that part of your hand is on the ruler and part of your hand is on the quilt, and don't have a death grip. The harder you push, the harder it is to move things. So again, you're going to find that feel, but use the lightest pressure you need to hold things in place, because that will leave the freest amount of movement under the quilting machine. Donna, what was the batting you're using? It is 80/20 cotton poly, and the brand I'm using is Winline. That's my current favorite. I also like Hobbs very much. They're quite comparable. The other side of Watashi. Is this in BSR mode? If so, which one? Do you like the Bernina? I am. I'm in BSR mode 2, which means that the stitch regulation is on, but when I'm not moving the machine, no stitches are taken. That's what I like for the ruler. And I love my Bernina. I loved my Gamels too. So, but yes, I do love my Bernina. Matt, please shout out Austin Alderman in Kansas City. He works during the day, so never catches these live, but watches them religiously every Friday night. He's such a huge fan, very new quilter. Well, absolutely. Shout out to Austin. I'm so glad, Austin, if you find these helpful, and I'd love for you to comment sometimes on one of the shows and let me know like what you find most helpful. Certainly my goal is chiefly to help novice quilters who aren't as experienced maybe as I am, because I wish I had had that when I was a new quilter. Somebody to watch, somebody to see how do they do that? Is it okay to do this and that? Yeah, so that's what I hope I am for you guys. Betsy, the Hera markings are parallel to the quilt side. What dimension did you use? Width divided by 6. I use 6.5, Betsy, but it might not be identical for you because not all fabric is the same width. So I just got the largest chevrons that I could out of my quilt top, but I did have to trim some off. Like, you have to have your backing be a little wider, right? So after I'd trimmed off 2 or 3 inches, then I divided that in 6 and went with that. And yes, the markings are running vertically on my yardage and vertically on my quilt. Melody, will the boot camp include topics for both long arm, on frame, and sit down? I mean, yes, because a lot of these topics and principles apply to both. But when I, for example, show a bobbin casing, it's going to be the bobbin casing from my long arm. I'm just more knowledgeable about that. So that's what I'm going to speak about. Tons and tons of the principles will apply. They just will. They're the same across all machines and certainly across long arm brands. Even though I don't have all brands to demonstrate on, the principles absolutely apply across all brands. Sherry, I quilt baby panels and some of them aren't square. Any suggestions on how to square them up before I put them on my Q20 frame? Thank you. My friend Shelly Seavercrop, and I think her YouTube channel is Wheatland Quilting. She's got some great tips on that, and I think she has a little tiny booklet about it too. The thing about printed panels is they're often not square, and almost always the print is not square to the grain line. So you just have to kind of find what you can live with in terms of one or the other, because you're not going to get all things, right? But what is helpful if you're trying to change the shape of it a little is steam. So what I do even on finished quilts is I will stretch them out on the floor and pin them in the shape that I want them to be and mist them with water and leave them to dry. So if you need to alter the shape of it a little bit, that's a good way to do it. Introduce moisture. You probably could pass your steam iron lightly over the top of it too, and it would do the same thing. That moisture, even that heat, will kind of reprogram those fibers a little bit into the shape you want it to be. Okay, more? Oh, lots more, Mr. Producer says. Mike or Sharon, what is the trick to making such perfect circles and swirls? Practice is certainly a trick, but another trick that I don't see a lot of people applying is slow down. And I hope you're seeing value in seeing me do this in real time. I don't whiz around those circles. I go slow enough that I'm in control of my machine all the way around. So that's where I would start. Laura, how many stitches per inch are you using? At the moment, Laura, it's funny you asked that. At the moment, I have 9 on. I usually quilt with 10. But yesterday, I was working on a quilt that was super bulky, had a lot of miscellaneous fibers in it, and so I lengthened that stitch length. I think I even had 8 on yesterday. I've got 9 on right now. So there you go. Full disclosure. Cassandra, have you done one of these with Minky as the solid color? I've not. I don't know that you couldn't, but I don't think I've ever quilted a project with Minky on the top. You could put Minky on the bottom, I suppose, and quilt this design on the top, and it would certainly be pretty. It would be really hard to see all this detailed dots on a print. It's worth a try. Let me know if you try it. Tag me in a post. Betsy, what's the trick to wrapping feathers around in the inside curve? Ah, that's a good question, Betsy. I'll try and remember to talk about that the next one I go around, okay, on the next row of feathers.
Or watch the feather class.
Mr. Producer is saying, or watch the feather class, but I don't think I have a class or a video on that. So it's a great question, Betsy, and I'll do my best to answer it in the next line of feathers. Linda, I so appreciate that you share all this info and that you're offering this boot camp for a reasonable price. Thank you for that. I appreciate it too. It is a ton of content and over a period of days, and it's a real time commitment for me and for you. And so I want to make it worth your while and worth my while as well. So hopefully I hit happy medium. Pam, will the boot camp be recorded in case you miss one of the days? Yes, it will. There will be links sent via emails and in the Facebook group to all of the live things. You can watch them all via replays right up until that 11th of October when it closes. And you can watch them over and over again if you want to. Okay, last one. Nita, Susan, your can-do attitude is so helpful. Helps me remove doubt and jump in and try. I appreciate that, Nita. That's something I've developed over the years, and to some extent it's something I was born with. I look back at some of the early quilts that I did where I bit off way more than I knew how to chew. Ruler work was an example. I dived into a pretty complex, pretty detailed custom quilt early on in my ruler work. Way more than I knew how to do, but you know what? I figured it out during the course of the quilt. So if I can teach novice quilters anything, it would be that. Don't be afraid to try. You'll figure it out. You'll learn a whole bunch. Elaine, hi Susan and Dave. This is so cool. I see lots of baby quilts in my future. Great way to practice several skills and make something of value. Great for charity quilts and gifts. Yes, yes, and yes. And don't forget, I do have several others. I think this is the 5th episode I've done with a whole cloth baby quilt, each one of them being a little bit different. So you can find other ideas in the other episodes. Linda, answering the Minky question. I'm quilting a baby quilt with backing of Minky. The quilting pattern shows up. Yeah, I kind of missed all that. Absolutely. The quilting shows up beautifully on the back inside the Minky. It does. Quilting shows up gorgeously on the Minky. But I think the question was, what if you were doing Minky as a solid and print on the other side? I think it would be hard to do this kind of marking on a print. So then you'd have to have the Minky up, and I have not ever done that. I don't know how that would work. Like, I think that would be really tricky for ruler work, because how would you know, it would shift on that. But by all means, give it a try. I would start small. And a baby quilt is small, so there's that. Okay, we ready to keep going? All right, you guys. I need to advance my quilt. It's kind of a funny thing. It feels like there's still more room here, but as you saw when I did this one wavy line, I did actually bump my rail. I've lost a little bit of space because I have that ruler plate on, right? I can't go quite as close to the front rail as I used to. And the fact that my chevrons dip so far, I have to do a little bit at a time. So let's go forward. Take the magnets off. Advance the quilts. That's about as far as I can go. And I've mentioned a few times, but I am going to fill in the top of those chevrons that we're missing, the dips. I'm just going to wait until I get the rest of the quilt done, and then I'll go back up there and do that marking and fill it in. And I'll try and make it look like the quilting just extends off the edge. When I advance a quilt, I always tug on my quilt top and tug on my batting. Batting tends to stretch out on the edges and therefore pull up in the middle. So, on this little quilt, you're not going to notice it very much, but that's just kind of my, what I do every time I advance the quilt. Tug on both of those, smooth them down well, and then we'll go and baste the sides. And then we'll start in on our marking again. So I do have another wide design, not the feathers, planned. So I want to get that all in so you've seen at least one entire repeat today. guess I wouldn't have to lock stitch my basting, would I? Because I have so little backing extending beyond my quilt top, I did not put clamps on that first section, and it seemed to work fine. But what I'm seeing now that I've advanced is that the area that I've quilted is definitely pulling in a little bit from the sides. So what I'm going to do is get my single clamp, like not my broad E-edge ones, but my single clamp, and I'm going to tug on that quilt a little bit and put a clamp on it to have some tension on that quilted area. So this hopefully will not get in the way of my ruler and ruler plate, but it will apply a little tension to keep that quilted portion that I've already done stretched out just a touch. This just comes under the loose heading of managing, you know, learning to know how your fabric and textiles behave and managing it. So that's one of the ways I'm going to manage it. Okay, our 2 magnets on the front again. And we need some more marking because I was not able to finish the full repeat. So let's make sure we know where we're at here. Okay, I've just got to make sure I've got the right lines in place. And I actually can't fully see that repeat. I'm seeing a problem here, you guys. Note to self for the next one, because my whole repeat is 18 inches long, I'm having a hard time viewing the whole thing at any given moment. So I'm going to take a second, I'm going to get another ruler, and I'm going to put the bottom half, I'm going to transfer it onto another ruler. So I'm literally taking my same markings, I'm going to put them on this other ruler so that I've got a sort of half repeat on this ruler. You're seeing me just think on the fly. I don't know if this will be a solution or if I have to think of a different solution for the other quilt for the next time I do a quilt, but this is my working solution for now. Get that Sharpie out of the way of my quilt. I have to know which lines these are. Okay, got it. There. And I want my blue pen for the quilt. And again, I marked the vertical lines, the divisions of the chevrons, with my smooth tracing wheel before I ever loaded the quilt. So I can see a very subtle, but it is there, a crease on that vertical line. So that's where I'm dropping the dots. And that's where I'll turn the corners of my chevrons when I'm quilting. So a bit of info on Live and Unscripted again before we go on quilting. We have for a long time tried to air these twice a month. Recently I've been doing so much traveling, and I am for the rest of this year yet. So whenever we can, we air these on a Friday. They are always a live stream, real time, whatever happens, you get to see on the show. We don't edit it out. My goal being to just share how work actually happens in my studio. How long things take, the shortcuts I take, the efficiencies I've found. We talked at some length about my loading process earlier today. So if you weren't here for the beginning and you're interested in that, go back and have a look at the early part of this show. Oops, I've still got a basting stitch on. We don't want that. I'm feeling resistance. Why is that? Because of my clamp. So, live and learn. I thought that that clamp would be out of the way of my ruler plate, but in fact it's not. So it's got to come off while I'm using my ruler. And actually, a thought is occurring to me that would be a possibility, and that is you literally could go from top all the way to the bottom of this quilt and put the ruler lines in, and then you could roll the quilt back and put the free motion quilting in and take that ruler plate off. That would be an option. I forgot to check that bobbin case. I think I'm going to. It's rattling so badly. At the end of this line, we'll go have a peek. I think this last spell of traveling is the longest I've ever been away from my Bernina. So it makes me wonder if it needs, you know, just a few frequent oilings to get it caught up. And I'm short some marking lines here still. Let me see, right here on the edge. No, I'm still short. Something's wrong, you guys. Let me see what I did here. Something's wrong. Trust me, there are a million ways to go wrong with this. Just a million. Somehow my lines are not measuring up on this right-hand side. Let me just compare to the same lines over here. Yes, we have a difference. And why is that? That's the top. That's the top. Huh. I'm really stumped here. Still puzzling it out. Okay, interesting. So I have made a mistake. You guys, this is a reality show. We did mention that, didn't we? And I can see it now when I stand back far enough and look at it. So I've got 1, 2, 3 chevrons. This dip is an inch lower than the other dip. So the million-dollar question is, what am I going to do about that? And the answer to it so far is, I'm not going to undo it. There's just no point in undoing all that stitching. It would literally be faster to make another baby quilt. So I'm going to try to gradually accommodate and move it up. And then I'm going to see what it looks like when the quilt is done. If I think it looks terrible, then I'll just move on to another baby quilt, and this will be a practice one. And if I think it looks fine, then I'll go ahead and give it away. So long story short, I've got to kind of fudge my lines now to try and get that point up to where it ought to be. And I can tell that now when I'm looking at my like bottom ends of my chevrons, they're not the same. So we are going to figure it out. Yes, we are. This is my top. This is my bottom. So I've got to go right here. I'm just going to try and double check this so I get it right this time, or at least I'm moving in the right direction this time. Yep, it is just that one line that is too low. So this one needs to be like that. That is my last double. I'm still puzzling. Forgive me while I still puzzle. I want to be sure I'm going in the right direction with this, and I'm not convinced. It seems too low. Okay, I found it. And I am going to mark this one in because I want to be sure that it looks right before I start quilting it. So, I mean, that is the beauty I can actually draw them in, even though I was quilting dot to dot before. If I choose to, I can actually draw them in so that I can, excuse me, judge whether they look right this time. And that's not. So where's my lid? There it is. Here's my trusty eraser. And good thing I tried that, because I can see that the parallel between these lines is not the same. So in all my drawing of dots, I went to the wrong dot, essentially. You guys are getting to see the real Susan at work, which is often a fly by the seat of the pantser. So that's those lines. I hope you have some nice music playing while I'm thinking. I'm just trying to think if there's a better way to work my way through this maze. Okay, someone's got an idea? I'm all ears for an idea. Okay, Nita, Susan, in the low spot, should you stitch a flower or feather or add a stitched or embroidered baby's name since she is born now? I don't know that I can, Nita, like, because my repeat is this giant feather and then these narrower stripes. So that stripe is quite significant. So I don't know that I can add or take away a part. All that's happened is my one low point is a bit lower than the other low points. So what I want to do is just make it 1/2 inch higher in this next repeat and 1/2 inch in the further repeat, and then it'll be the same. And you know, I have to acknowledge that this may look terrible when the quilt is done. When you step back and look at it, if those chevrons aren't fairly precise, that may look terrible. But I mean, that's what I'm all about. I'm learning. I'll learn what the kind of forgiveness level is of those. And if it doesn't look good, I'm not going to be worried about it. I've lost nothing but a morning of quilting. But I'm going to give it a whirl. But I'm having a terrible time getting the right lines in place, let me tell you. That one's right. Okay, now it's looking correct. So I'm going ahead and drawing them in on this side because now I have so many dots over here that I wouldn't know which dot to hold my big ruler to. So that is now correct. Okay. Whew. I think we're in business. We'll soon see, won't we? Need the long ruler for quilting. Take the marking ruler out. Oh, I'm going to take that clamp off. Again, my ruler plate is so large, which is absolutely lovely from the ruler standpoint, but from the getting in the way standpoint, not so much. Thank you, Nita, for chiming in, though. I sure appreciate that you guys are willing to share expertise on this show, and I'm certainly willing to acknowledge that there's things that I don't know or have never done before or run into. And I'm happy to learn from others. I'm just the only one silly enough to do it on camera. Can you guys hear that rattling? I still forgot to check the bobbin. In all that hubbub over where my lines are. We are going to stop right here and give that bobbin a little drink of oil so it stops rattling. And how are we doing for time, Mr. Producer? We're at an hour and 40 minutes. Okay, I'm going to persevere until we get one full repeat done. Bobbin is in good shape. Definitely not empty, so we're just going to add a little drop of oil. Okay, what is next? The 3-inch one is next. Certainly the bigger things make the quilt go faster, so the feathers, for example. And so I added a second large-ish element, which is just going to be simple L loops, and that's what I'm leaving this wider space for. And I should mention here too, one of the things that I offer is a monthly subscription membership, and in that membership, which I call Advance, not because it's necessarily advanced quilting, but it's advancing your skills, and it's kind of a play on advancing your quilt. In that membership, I do have one quilt along, I call it, of a whole cloth design like this one. And in that one, I go into significant depth about the exact measurements that I used, some PDF drawing sheets for my type of whimsical feathers and different ideas that you can put in that, and some different border ideas you can tuck in.
At Amica
So
Insurance,
if you really do want
we
some
know this isn't a
hand-holding for
car.
project like this, consider that subscription. It's $12.95 a month. New content is put in it every month. Sometimes more custom quilting. This honestly leans more toward custom than toward edge to edge. But I do love edge to edge, so quite often I offer a new edge to edge design. Guest teachers come in from time to time and teach on different topics, so that's all the sort of thing that's in Advance. I'm sure Dave will put a link in the chat for you, but also you can find it by going to my website and clicking on the Learning tab. Okay, let's do those loops. Much like the O's, I try to either get a loop right in the turn of the chevron or center 2 loops over the turn of the chevron. Either way looks pleasing because it's symmetrical. What doesn't look as pleasing is if you get them really off-centered. In one of the recent questions that I was taking, one of the comments was, I'm going to try one of these baby quilts. It looks like a great way to practice different designs. And I completely agree. I think that's one of the best features of quilts like this. You get an opportunity to try out border designs, especially if you're doing one that's just got straight lines and not these chevron shapes. And it's an easy way to try out new designs and to work on your control, because you literally are working in straight borders from side to side. You don't even have borders that go around all 4 directions of a quilt. So it is a fabulous way to try out new things, build your skill set, and have something lovely to give away, or to give away at the end. Or use, I guess would be the other word. Oh, I'm missing some dots. It's amazing how easy it is to forget some of these lines. Okay, let's make sure we've got the right matchup in place. Yes, we do. And you see the difficulty that I had with that one chevron. Even though I went to all the trouble of marking my ruler first, planning it out on my plexi sheet first, I just have learned that the hard way. It's really hard to get this all straight and get it right without some significant pre-planning. And the time planning is well spent. Those of you who watch me a lot have probably figured out by now, when I talk, I often lose my train of thought. And so that's working against me today. But it's all right. So I'm not making adjustments to the depth of this odd chevron when I'm doing these more closely spaced lines, because I think it will be very obvious. I'm going to make that adjustment in the feather line, which is the biggest one. It's 5 inches from top to bottom, and so a 1/2 inch adjustment of that spacing will show the least there, is my thinking. I might not even do quite a 1/2 inch. I might spread it over 3 instead of 2. But you see what I'm saying? That it will be better camouflaged in the wider line by far than in one of these narrow ones. Why don't we just do this wavy line while we're here? Even these wavy lines, now that I see them here, I marked it 1 inch from point to point in my measurements on the straight up and down line, not really remembering that when you make an angle out of that, now my straight lines are actually only about 3/4 of an inch apart, so I could have made this wider too. So what I'm going to do after this quilt is finished is actually take some notes and write down some of these measurements, so that next time I go to do a quilt like this, I'm not starting from the ground up. I can use the knowledge that I gained on this quilt and put it to use in that next one. So all of these narrow lines that are in these more closely spaced stripes, I would have done a little further apart. And I will do them further apart on the next quilt. I think I've actually only done one chevron one before. I tend to do just the straight borders from side to side. It's much, much faster. But I do love the look of the chevron, so I wanted to try that again. One more line in, and I do not think I can do the next one down based on the position of my ruler plate to the front bar. So this will be the last straight one here. And we have now, in fact, completed one full repeat. So there was the large line of feathers, the 3 narrow ones that form the stripe, the large line of loops, and then the same 3 narrow ones. And then we'll start again with the feather after that. So I'll go ahead and quilt the bubbly line in here between these, and then I will take some questions and comments, and then I think we'll call it for today. If you are enjoying this very candid look at my quilting process, please give the episode a thumbs up. If you will click the bell for notification, YouTube will let you know next time I'm going live. These live and unscripted episodes we try to always do on a Friday at 9 a.m. Pacific time, but I can't always tell you which Friday it's going to be until we get closer to it. If you haven't already, sign up for my newsletter. You can do that easily at my website. You'll get a little pop-up there. You know how websites work. It'll invite you to share your name and email address. And what I do is the Wednesday before these live and unscripteds, I send out a picture of the project we'll be working on and some idea of the topics that will be contained in it. And so that way you know if it's one that will interest you. I was saying earlier that part of my travels recently was a week spent in northwestern British Columbia with members of my family, including my sister, who is an avid quilter as well. She does a lot more piecing. She's a great piecer. So I brought home 1, 2, 3, 4 quilts from my sister that I'm going to quilt for her. So you might see some of those in future episodes. One of them is a Bonnie Hunter mystery quilt. I think it was Betsy that had asked about how I turn a corner with my feathers. And I don't think I'm going to quilt another feather line, so I will get up my plexiglass sheet here in a moment and show you how I did that. There's a really simple way that's a simple tip that's really helpful in doing that. Maybe you all want to vote in the comments, actually. I'll let you do that. I'll let you guys decide. I would have to do one more advance and one more set of markings, at least a partial set of markings, and then I could quilt another feather row. So if you want to see that, if you want to see that in action, how I turn those corners, I would be happy to do that. But it's going to mean, I don't know, another 15 or 20 minutes probably. So you guys vote, if you would, and Mr. Producer will give me the feedback. Well, not all of these bubbles are round. Some of them look like they have been well and truly sat on. The thing is, though, that when we're working on them, when I'm standing here quilting them, you know, my nose is 10 inches away from them, so I notice every little corner and irregularity. But the bigger truth is that when you step back and look at the quilt as a whole from a few yards away or a half a room away, you just do not see those irregularities. Stop with my needle down. Okay, what are we thinking for continuation? People are voting more quilting. Okay, I'm happy to oblige. Let me advance. We'll take a few questions and comments, and I'll get a sip of my coffee. And I should add here, when I get to the bottom of this quilt, like I have not pre-planned exactly how many rows of chevrons there will be, and I absolutely could have, but I didn't. So more than likely I will just get to, it's hard with the machine there. More than likely what I'll do is I'll end when I've got a bottom on my chevrons. I'll just call that the end of the quilt, and then I'll fill in the triangles, and then I'll trim it off, whatever else is left. I think that looks nicer than stopping halfway in between some of the chevrons, if that makes sense. So that's my personal preference, but you absolutely could just keep quilting right to the end of your fabric. So that's entirely personal preference. It's looking pretty fine, although I will confess it's looks less pretty when you see the blue and purple markings all over the peachy pink quilt. But it will get prettier as those markings disappear. Funny, it is just so automatic for me to press the button that locks stitches. I certainly would not need to do that for basting, but I just do it out of force of habit. Okay, a little more marking. I'm going to go ahead and put my lines in this time. I just want to be sure that I'm getting this right as I can. I want my blue pen. As right as I can. That's the key word, isn't it? This way I'll be able to see, this is the very end of a repeat right here. I'll be able to see how those chevrons line up and kind of make a decision on how I want to adjust the next repeat to accommodate my wonkiness. Okay, so we have chevrons all the way across. And yes, these are the ones right here. Low point here, low point here. This low point is lower. Yep, just that one. Okay, so the next one is a 5-inch. And somehow I've got a whole bunch of dots on here, and I'm actually going to take them off so that I can kind of start with a clean slate, because my feather was the first part of a repeat I did. And I'm going to do a feather for the first one again. So we're just going to take those off and then make the adjustments we need to make from a position of strength. You see how cool this little eraser pen works. I can just apply the merest little bit of moisture. It's not even fully removing them, but it's making them faint enough that I'll be able to know which dot is the right dot, and it's not so wet that I can't go and proceed and do my proper set of markings that I want to do. I love this pen. It's by So Line again. Pretty sure there's a link in the stuff I use notes below this episode. Okay, do we have any questions or thoughts? Yes, we do, Mr. Producer says. Okay, Charlotte, for the bootcamp class, will the YouTube videos be available for a while after the class ends? They'll be available till the end of the bootcamp, which is October 9. I think I said the 11th earlier, and I apologize. October 9 is the end of the boot camp, and when the Facebook group closes, that's the wrap-up. But until that time, they'll all be available for watching as often as you want to. Two-part question coming up. Thank you for offering the boot camp. I'm signed up and ready to start. Your videos are inspiring, and you make me feel confident enough to try it myself. That's the goal. Good. Okay, next part. You make free motion quilting and ruler work so doable. Thanks for taking the time to show how you handle challenges as you're quilting. I'm excited for your upcoming boot camp. Thank you for those comments, because that just underlines for me I'm hitting the mark. That's what I'm trying to do, is just share honestly. It's not always perfect. It's not always pretty, but this is how I get quilting done. Charlotte, would it maybe be helpful to number the markings on the ruler somehow? Do you know, it probably would, Charlotte. You know, as you can see with this cutting ruler, there's so much on there. I don't know if I could see it. But you know, another option, thinking this through, another option might be to take something like, I don't know, a parchment paper sheet or wax paper, right? Or just inexpensive craft paper, and transfer the markings on there with maybe even a guideline of what's in each one. Do you know what I mean? And you could just have a strip of paper. There's any number of ways that we could experiment with. I've always done it with the ruler, and it has served me well until today. Rebecca, would using a line of your masking tape along the bottom help to straighten it? Yes, that's a great idea. And you know, Rebecca, had I used that painter's tape with my first row of chevrons, I would have seen the problem right away. That would be a great way to double check your markings. Yes, it would. For future quilts, could you use a soft tape measure with the markings? You could keep the marked tape. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. You guys are coming up with great ideas. Yes. There are numerous ways you could do it. I just think the Sharpie on a ruler is something most quilters don't think of. Like, you think, oh, Sharpie next to my quilt, cannot do that. Don't want to ruin my rulers. And actually you can. So I wanted to share that one. But yes, as you see, there are lots of great ideas about how to transfer those markings. Becky, which way do you load your batting? The needle punched, side down, or up? Becky, this is a question that goes round and round. My understanding of the Winline polycotton batting is that there is no scrim, and that I can load it either way in terms of the needle punch. Now, I'm not going to say it's an always, because some quilters have strong opinions about that. I'll say this though, I've used it both ways and I've been successful with it. So that's just my personal experience. You know, again, type of fabric, type of needle is all going to play into that, like whether or not you get that little bit of bearding from the batting. There's more factors than just batting this way or batting this way. So, my 2 cents. After the 11th of October, will the boot camp videos still be available somewhere? So first off, I misspoke. The end is the 9th of October. And no, at the 9th of October, they do in fact go away. However, the little ebook, Tension Headaches, anyone, has a lot of the same tips and information, just in a very concise fashion. And that you'll get to keep forever. So you can refer back to that at any time. Certainly you're welcome to take notes on any of that, but the videos will be gone. Do you attach binding on the long arm? I do. I've not done it frequently, simply because I kind of have a system worked out at my sewing machine table. I have extensions and yada yada, and I can do it really fast. And so I tend to just go to what I know and can do quickly. I absolutely have done them on the long arm, and I feel like if someone loved doing that, you could get much faster and quicker at that than I am. But for me at this point, it just takes me longer. But yes, it does work beautifully, and all you need is a straight edge ruler, no fancy tools. Linda, I've missed you this month. Welcome home. Well, thank you. I've missed myself. It's been a month. Betsy, inside corners and feathers have been my nemesis forever. Thanks for the help. Yes, we'll quilt a row of those. It's really simple. It's really simple. You'll love it. Nita, the other idea that works when a mistake happens is to repeat the mistake, then it becomes planned and no one is the wiser. And you know, Nita, that would not be a bad idea, to keep repeating that same thing and have the chevrons just look like they're a little bit wonky, uneven chevrons. Okay, I'll put that in the back of my mind for a minute or two before I start laying down markings. Betsy, thin piece of box cardboard for markings? Yep, like a cereal box kind of thin cardboard? Absolutely, absolutely. Adding machine paper rolls are amazing for markings. Just like a paper pantograph, they can be saved and used for future projects. That's a great point, because you could write on them, label them. I could put notes on it, like this spacing did not work great. I could create a new spacing that I think would be better for these same quilting designs and have that for next time. I think I'll take that idea and use it. Thank you. Okay. All right, people. I'm going to take Nita's idea seriously, and I am only going to shift this chevron a tiny bit. because as I am thinking of it, I think a 1/2 inch shift is really going to catch my eye. So I'm only going to do a tiny shift, and basically by the end of the quilt I might be right, and if not, it's just going to be that slightly wonky chevron. That's what I'm going to do. Okay, I know that the last line I have marked is the very top end of my repeat, so I'm going to mark down from there. It's hard to see on my ruler and with my super duper bright filming lights. Makes everything reflective. Just in case someone is just tuning in. Oh, I veered off my line. One of the big tips that I gave at the beginning was that I marked the vertical lines of my chevrons with I did a smooth tracing wheel, but a Hera marker would work as well before I loaded my quilt on the long arm. So I have a very subtle fold crease that I marked on these vertical chevron columns. And now I'm trying to drop my dots right on that line. And again, I'm working with super bright reflective lights while I'm recording, so I missed that subtle little fold, so I'm just dropping them in again in the right place. Okay, this is my one that's off a little bit, so I'm going to zhuzh it. Don't you love my zhuzh word? Just a touch. Just a little touch. If you are enjoying this real life episode, do give it a thumbs up. Do take a moment to share with your friends before the next one. If you're signed up for my newsletter, you do get an advance warning, usually on Wednesdays, of what's coming up on the Friday. You can grab my newsletter by simply going to my website, and after you're there for a couple of seconds, you'll get a little pop-up. I bet you all know how that works. And the boot camp that we've been talking about during the questions is an upcoming kind of intensive on tension and stitch formation, which goes much deeper than just tension at a quilting machine. It begins, the Facebook group opens on the 28th of September. 29th, we're having a little welcome party in that Facebook group. Well, it'll air on YouTube too. And then the 30th is the first official training. There are 3 in-depth trainings. There are several live smaller sessions. All of them include a question and answer period. If you choose to join the Facebook group, and it is optional, but if you choose to join, then that's an extra opportunity for you to not only interact with other students and with me, but you can actually share photos in there. So if you're having, if you've got one of the practice sessions, you're working on it, and XYZ is happening at your machine, you can actually share a photo there, and we can discuss some of those and see if we can find solutions for you. It's not a glamorous topic, but it is an underlying fundamental topic. They say this about your health. You can have 1,000 problems, but when your health breaks down, you only have one problem. I feel like that quilting. You can have 1,000 problems, but when your tension is off, you've only got one problem. And so if you can figure this out, it makes everything so much easier. So that's what this boot camp is all about. If you can't make it live to the sessions, that's totally fine. All the replays and videos will be available. Links will be provided via email and in the Facebook group. You can watch them as many times as you like until the boot camp closes on the 9th of October. Mr. Producer is going to drop a link in the chat again. I know he is. The boot camp. There is a fee of $37. I've tried to keep it super reasonable. And I've tried to absolutely pack it with value for you. I must have traced over my crease because I have 2 creases right here. Which one's the right one? So I talked earlier about the fact that I've done these quilts a number of times, and I've kind of taken the shortcut of not putting in all these marks and just quilting point to point with my ruler. But as you saw, I ran into a hiccup with the one that I actually had mismarked. And had I really drawn them, I would have seen that. So now I'm kind of rethinking my shortcut decision. It's not a shortcut if you end up spending more time fixing, is it? So maybe I will learn for a while to mark my quilts when I'm doing chevrons. And of course, when you're doing straight lines, it's much easier, like just straight horizontal lines. You don't really have to do this kind of marking. It's not as easy to run amok, is it? If you're interested in more of these baby quilts, more ideas, this is the 5th whole cloth that I've done on YouTube. So you can look for number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4. They're all a little bit different, a little bit different quilting designs, definitely different fabrics and styles. So there's more ideas on the other ones. I want to mention too our upcoming cruise. It's unbelievable how close this is getting, my word. When we first planned it, it was over a year away, and that seemed like it would never arrive, and here we're coming up on it. Anyway, cruise is to the Caribbean, and it is January 18 to 25 of 2025. It is lots and lots and lots of free motion artistic quilting. 3 teachers are myself, and I will be focusing on my love, which is edge to edge quilting. That's kind of my emphasis. Sam Albert's co-teacher, she's a quite contemporary quilter, and she's really genius with thinking of new designs, like kind of new ideas that we've not seen before as quilters, and also working with what she calls quilter's block. So, you know, when you get stumped for what to quilt and you're standing and staring, she has a really good checklist and process for working through that slump. That's Sam. And then Beth Ann Nemesh, lots of you know her. Beth Ann is truly an artist, and her quilting reflects that, and she's a master quilter. She's highly skilled, highly experienced. So I'm just thrilled to pieces that she'll be along on the cruise. So all of our classes are going to present together this broad, rich quilting experience, and then we're adding on to it as kind of a happy bonus the fact that all 3 of us are in business quilting, and so we're going to do these breakout sessions that are related to business. One of Sam's is building a video library and how you store it and how you access it and use that. One of mine is going to be photographing quilts, so even if you're not in business, you might really want to learn how to do that just for keeping pictures of your quilts, but some simple tips that can make your photographs so much better. Beth Ann's going to be talking about client relations, and there may be other topics that come up. They're just going to be more casual, kind of breakfasts together, talking over these business topics. So Dave will put a link in the chat for the cruise. There are not many rooms on the boat as a whole left. We only have a few left in our cruise, and I'm happy to report that our price with class fee included is right now almost identical to what the ship is offering for a cruise with no classes. So, bit of a steal of a deal right now. Okay, we're getting ready to quilt feathers. I am going to quilt in those 2 lines above them first, but I'm going to go ahead and mark in my spine for my feather. So again, it's a simple undulating line. I'm getting an upwards curve and a downwards curve within that chevron each time. And it's not hyper precise, as you can see. So my curve is following the shape of the chevron, because it's really difficult to quilt if you do an opposing curve, let me tell you. And then we'll emphasize as we quilt it how to do the angle. I'm going to change this one. That went pretty wonky. Okay. Need my big ruler. Don't need my marking ruler. I've got so much stuff. I think what I'm going to do, just for ease, I'm going to back up my quilt a little bit so it's closer to me. Just a little easier for me to quilt. Now that I have those markings all in place, I need my magnets on the front. Alrighty. If I start at the other side, I'll be lined up just right to start that feather. I didn't actually hear back from you guys. If you have an opinion about whether all my feather rows should go from left to right or whether they should alternate, there's still time if you want to jot down an opinion about that. And I'm still on basting stitch. I keep doing that, don't I? So a few logistics here. I'm stitching with 40 weight isocord 100% polyester thread, and I have the same thread in the top and on my bobbin. I am in BSR 2, which on the Bernina is stitch regulation, and when I don't move the machine, the needle does not coast. When I hold still, it holds perfectly still and doesn't stitch. I'm using a Quilter's Apothecary straight ruler. And this is Jamie Wallen. He's Quilter's Apothecary. I love his rulers. I love this handle that you can grab in multiple ways. If you have ever done a whole quilt with a ruler, the type of ruler that you just press down on is very fatiguing over time. Very. And so this handle makes all the difference in the world. So it's a well thought out ruler. There is definitely a link in the notes below this episode to Jamie's shop, and he's got a lovely little collection of straight rulers there with my name on it, the SBS collection. And there's a coupon code as well in the description for 10% off any ruler or combination of rulers in that grouping. And you can add to it anything you like from his shop, but the coupon is only effective on rulers in my little collection. What else logistic wise? Important that if you're doing ruler work, you do have a ruler plate on, as I do now. It's like an extender plate. Sometimes they're metal, sometimes they're acrylic, but it gives me this little table that my ruler balances on. You cannot safely do ruler work on just the regular nose of a long arm. Your ruler will tip, you will stitch over it, there will be a big bang. And for once I can't say, ask me how I know this, because I've actually never done that. I've seen other people do it, but I've actually never done that. Are we getting any feedback, Mr. Producer, on the feather direction? They're about 50-50. Well, then I'll get to make the casting vote, won't I? So even with this little wavy line, I stretch it right here so that I get that curve going around the point of the chevron. So it looks awkward if you have it half on and half off, and it certainly looks awkward if you curve the other direction. So whatever I need to do, stretch it or condense it to get it to happen, I make it curve around the tip of that chevron. And I use this little border on quite a lot of quilts too, so I do the same thing at the corner of the quilt. I either compress it and make it short, or stretch it and make it long so that it curves around the point. Well, and I've decided I'm doing my feather on this side. Okay, I'm going to take my needle out for a minute so I can move my close-up camera and show you what I'm going to do with the feather, and then I'll do it. Let me grab my marking pen. I've got this subtle crease going on here, and even if I didn't have that, I've done this so many times, I tend to do it by eye, but if I draw it out for you, you'll really see the process. My thread is so twisted. How weird. You'll really see the process. Here's the line of my corner, and if I was doing this around a border of a quilt, this would be the 45-degree line in a border, right? So if this was a perfectly square corner, I would be drawing on the 45-degree angle. And what's going to happen is I'm going to be quilting my feathers left, right, left, right, left, right. And on this lower side, I'm not going to extend past this line. I'm going to fill them in here a little shorter, and I'm going to curve right around with those, and then I'm going to drop one down on this side, and it will just look like it has turned the corner. So now that I've explained all that, now you can watch it happen. And I'm doing my whimsical feather, which has all kinds of different shapes in it, but it really doesn't matter what the shape is. I'm just going to bend it as I've described. This is what we quilters call a spineless feather. So I drew a spine, so I've got a guideline, but I'm never actually quilting it, but I am really merging into it like I did there. So a couple of stitches actually follow on it, and you'll see that spine then when all my quilting is done. I don't love the thready look of quilting over it and then passing over it again as I'm quilting the feathers, especially on a whole quilt like this. I feel like that really detracts from it. And in my talking, I just stitched right over my last feather. So I'm just going to undo that a little bit. Look at me. Don't even know how to drive. Lost total track of where I was there. Total. So a good place, by the way, to splice is in a corner, a point. Even though you've got a stitch regulator on, there will always be some closer, tighter stitches in a point, so it's a little more secure. I'm leaving a couple stitches after the point, and I'm going to start my stitching in the point so that I'm going to overlap about 1/4 inch of stitching. So I feel like that's nice and secure. That's not going to come undone, and yet it's going to be unobtrusive and not really show. And I'm going to take half a second and look ahead and see where I'm going with my driving here. Okay, got it. So right here, I'm going to start ending my feathers before this center line that I drew in. That's my little guideline. I can tuck in another small one here, stretch some out at the top. And now I'm going to curve one right around. No matter what shape I had used for that feather, I did a molar, but I could have done a regular feather. I could have done, a puff head or a twirly feather. All of those would work, but it just bends it right around what came before the corner. In this one I have not drawn the line, but you'll see me do the same thing. Visually in my mind's eye, I've got a line right here, and I'm not going to extend past that with my inner feathers. Now that I've got the outer ones fairly full, now I'll drop one on the inside. You can see I changed the curve there a little bit. I thought it was just a little too severe. I make those shifts as I go. So is that all making sense? We'll do that a couple more times now before we finish going around this. And I see the problem with my drawn spine. I've got it's too curvy. There's too much shifting of direction, and I'm having a hard time following that and making it smooth. So I'm feeling the freedom, frankly, to just smooth it out, lessen those curves a little bit. Now you get a good view of it. See how these have ended before my angled line? And I'm going to do one more on the outside, and then I'll curve right back in. And it will have that really attractive and graceful bend. One more on the outside, right into the inside. And again, it doesn't matter which shape I choose, just bend it to fit. Here we are, coming up on that angle again. Tucking one in before it. Now doing several on the outside edge. If you've taken my all over feather class, it's a little bit like that in that we're putting a lot more feathers, 1, 2, 3, 4, on the outer edge, forcing the feather to turn a corner. This ruler before it falls off the edge with a clang. I think why I love this whimsical feather so much is that there's no two alike, so it makes it a very, very forgiving design. There's smaller ones, there's larger ones, there's all different shapes, and so I literally can decide whatever I need to fit in the little space that I've got. And I quite like that about this. So here we go again. I've filled in that inner section. I'm going to do several on the outer section. We've turned a corner. We've actually turned the last corner. This is where I overdrew my purple line, so I just need to make sure that I'm using the same one and I'm not going back and forth between the two. And my guideline. Pretend that one just ran right off the edge, and we're done our feather. Okay, you guys, we're well over 2 hours, so I think I'm going to call it. And after we're off air, I will proceed to finish the quilt. I might mention one more thing. I'll lift my magnets so that you can see. Sure, Mr. Producer's asking if we can zoom over this with the camera. I sure will, and then I'll go back and make the point that I wanted to make. Here's my little splice, by the way. And if I trim those threads, nobody would ever be able to find it. And I've secured it with lock stitches. That's not going anywhere. So here's the feather. You can see this is the one where I drew the line, kept my inner feathers before the line, filled in the outer feathers, and then finally bent an inner feather around. And basically followed that same process every time. So here's my unmarked line, kept those feathers inside it, filled in all the outside, and then dropped back around it. So that worked at every corner. Is that a good look? Okay, we've had a good look at that. All right, I'm going to move Stella off to the side a little bit. I was mentioning earlier a couple things about the yardage. So I've got this lovely floral on the back, or whatever print you decide. I recently did a dinosaur one, did a farm animal one. I've got a frogs one upcoming. Whatever you decide on the back. Solid on the front. I've learned the hard way that solid or very close to solid works best. I've done some grunge and they look really pretty. On one of my YouTube episodes, I did like a mottled one, and in my mind's eye, that was a really good idea, but in practice, you can't even see the quilting on it. Like you guys couldn't on the show, and even I can't in real life. Like it just is so camouflaged. So I do like a solid on the front. And when I buy my yardage, I usually get a yard and a half for the backing and a yard and a quarter for the front. I always trim a little off the width of the front so that I've got at least a little something to hang on to at the edges and to work with. And you still get very close to a 40-inch quilt, and that's a generous baby quilt, so that's totally fine. Also, I like to decide when I'm buying the fabric what I'm going to bind it with, and most often I'll just get more of the solid. So I think you can see from the edge there, maybe, the end of my backing is right here already approaching, but I still have quite a bit more quilt top. And I chose not to cut that first. I'm just going to go ahead and quilt down until I get close to that bottom of the backing, decide where I want my chevrons to end, and then after I dismount the quilt, I'll trim that off. Then I've got a nice goodly chunk to do my binding with. So that's how I do it. And in fact, when I trimmed the edges off this, I took the selvages off both sides, and then I took a chunk off of one side, and I saved that strip for binding too. I'm not a purist. I will use lengthwise and crosswise grain for my binding. It's fine, in my opinion. So make use of all that fabric bits. So let's see, are there any more comments or questions that we want to talk about before we go? Debbie, the feathers look great. Thanks for sharing your live sessions. They've helped me so much. I'm so glad, Debbie, you've been a loyal follower and watcher, and I'm glad it's being helpful to you. Catherine loved the feathers and the guidance in making them. You're very, very welcome. It's a simple tip, but it can make all the world of difference. Christy, where can we register for the boot camp? Mr. Producer has put a link in the chat. He'll probably do it again before we go. But also, if you watch on my social media, I'm running promotions for it right now. So it's all over the place and will be for the next week or 10 days. So, you got it, Dave? Yeah, he's got it. It's done. Charlotte, do you want to put the front camera on, hon? I forgot what you said earlier. What kind of marker are you using to mark the top of the quilt? Let me just grab them and I'll show you. My favorites. So I have two in play. The purple markers are always air erasable. I don't even know what brand this is. I think it's a no-name brand because I buy them by the dozen. I personally have not found the much more expensive brand name ones to last much longer, so that's my personal preference. I buy them by the dozen. I can sometimes use up a marker in a quilt, so you need more of them, but they don't last forever. They dry up too, so there's that. And then I get the blue ones are the water erasable, so they will stay in your quilt till you actually apply water and rinse them out. This one is Leonis. You know, again, I'm not a brand purist. That's just me. But you can get them in any kind of format. But purple usually is erased with air. Blue is erased with water. And sometimes there's pink out there too, and they're water erasable as well. And then this is the other tool that I absolutely love, and it's by Soline. And it's an eraser for these marking pens. It has a felt tip type point and a little water canister that you just fill like you would a syringe. You just suck up a little water into it. There's maybe a teaspoon in there. And then there's a little pinchy button you can squeeze, and it just releases dampness, and you can very precisely erase some of these markings if you've got them wrong. Imagine that. And that's the marking tool. So I think that's it. I'll mention the ruler again because we haven't talked about it since the beginning, because this was a lifesaver tip for me when another quilter shared it with me. And that is when you've got, as in the case today, we've got these multiples of markings with different spacings. Or sometimes you'll be working on a quilt and you've divided something into 3 sections and they're awkward and you only want to do that division once, right? You can literally mark on your ruler with a Sharpie. Drop in those marking points. And for today's purposes, I also marked what is the top end of my sequence and what is the bottom end, so I don't get it the other way, right? So you can mark it on with a Sharpie, and then an alcohol swab will take that off after your quilt is finished. So you can leave them on the ruler till you're done your quilt and then clean them all away. Okay, more comments? Rebecca, is there a reason you're not using your side clamps? Simply, Rebecca, because I have very little excess fabric on the sides, and so on the very first row, I kind of experimented with that. It's difficult with the ruler and side clamps that are close in. So I tried, since it's such a little quilt, I thought maybe I can do it without it shifting. And in fact, it did work fine. So I just left the side clamps off. That was a judicious decision. And if I had found that my quilt was shifting or tending to want to pleat, I would have put them on and I would have just managed with my rulers, but it would have been harder. So that was just a decision I made consciously for today's purpose. Catherine, do I understand that your backing is a 42 or 44 inch width fabric? That's correct. So is my top, but you know, from different brands and different manufacturers, that can vary, as you even see by saying 42/44. So I can't give you precise measurements for that. I just start with the printed yardage and go from there. Will you be offering the boot camp again in the future? Debbie is asking. Probably yes, Debbie. I'll see how it goes this time. It's kind of leading up, launching into an opening of enrollment into my free motion quilting masterclass, and I do that 2 times per year. So if everyone loves this boot camp and it's well received, chances are I'll do it again when I open my enrollment for my large course in the spring. So I like to offer this content, quite a lot of free content leading up to my enrollment, so that people get an opportunity to know me and see my skill set and all those things. So the boot camp is my offering this year. So we'll see how it goes. Okay, that's it for comments. All right, great. So a few last things then. This has been Live and Unscripted, airing the actual quilting of a project. And we try to do these once or twice each month, Mr. Producer and I. And always they are at 9 a.m. in the morning on a Friday, but we don't always know which Friday in advance. So thumbs up if you have enjoyed this episode. Turn on the notification bell if you want to know when I'm going live again, and or sign up for my newsletter at my website, because I always send out a picture a couple days in advance, a picture of the project in hand and what some of the topics might be that we'll be talking about. So I'd love to see you again in a future episode. Thanks so much for joining me today. It's been a pleasure quilting with you. Till next time.